They came in the morning light. Not with thunder or smoke. They came like a slow tide of metal and color. Armor plates caught the sun and split it into sharp lines. Banners moved like bright knives. Drums beat a steady march. The trade moon held its breath. Myra stood on a low roof and watched. She hugged her knees to keep warm. Below her, the street was full of people and stalls. Alien traders sold spice and glass. Human children chased each other between the legs of tall visitors. Myra's eyes went to the parade. Her heart felt small in the crowd. They measured strength by armor. That was how the visitors showed power. Big plates meant big danger. Bright edges meant old wars. The people watched and counted the rings on shoulder guards. They listened to which guilds walked first. Each step of armor said a name. A child stood near the parade line. The child held a small box. It was old and broken. A thin rope tied it closed. The child's hands trembled. The child watched one great armor in the center taller than the rest, with cold blue in its joints. The child put the box down at the big armor's base. No one saw the small action at first. The drums kept time. The big armor stopped. The leader of the parade turned. Faces under metal hoods looked down like deep wells. The child's mouth opened. A hush ran the length of the street. The leader's gauntlet came down. It was slow like thought. People leaned forward like wind toward rain. Myra felt the hush in her chest. Jonas ran up the street from the market. He saw the little box and the child. He saw the gauntlet. He knew what might come next. He felt fear and a strange tight hope at once. He had been a pilot once. He knew how thin bravery could be. He pushed through the crowd. Hal came behind him with a bundle of old wires and plant cuttings. Hal's hands were always stained with soil. He smelled of green leaves and rain. He moved with a calm that steadied the two of them. The three friends met at the edge of the parade. They watched as the gauntlet hovered. Myra thought of the old village where she grew up. She thought of nights when strangers brought food. She remembered a time when a roof fell and a neighbor crawled under to help. That memory was soft in her mind, but it was like fire. It told her what mattered. The leader's gauntlet did not crush the box. It stopped. The crowd waited. A small sound broke the quiet, the child's tiny breath. The leader looked at the box. The metal face did not show feeling, but the leader's eyes were not cold. They flicked to the child, then to the three friends. The air held like a string pulled tight. The leader made a sound that was not a word humans used. Two guards moved forward. Their plates shone like knives. People stepped back. Traders shut their stalls. A dog whined and pulled at its chain. The child reached for Jonas's hand. Jonas took it and held it like a promise. A small voice came from the crowd. A merchant with one missing ear said, "Why would a child do this?" The voice shook. Another whispered, "A sign. A challenge." Fear grew into noise. The alien drums felt louder. The leader raised a finger. The crowd fell silent again. The leader's interpreter stepped forward. The translator box clicked and hummed. The box spoke in soft, slow human words. "Explain," it said. The child could not speak. Myra looked at the box. She felt heat behind her eyes. The parade had always made humans feel small. Today it felt like a test. Myra stepped down from the roof. Her knees hit the stone with a small sound. Jonas and Hal followed. They did not run. They walked with their heads up. Friends do not always do great things. Sometimes they only take the smallest step. But small steps can stop an echo of steel. Myra knelt beside the child. She put her hand on the little box. The rope was frayed. The box smelled of smoke and coal. Myra opened it. Inside was a broken trinket, a piece of carved bone and a scrap of cloth. It looked like a toy. It looked like a promise. She told the crowd a short story. Her voice was clear and simple. She spoke of a family who had once found shelter under a palm. She spoke of strangers who traded bread for warm hands. This, she said, holding the trinket, is a memory of help. It is small. It says we owe each other warmth. Some faces softened. Others grew harder. The leader listened. The metal did not move. The translator hummed. The crowd waited like a field waits for rain. Then the leader did something no one expected. The gauntlet lifted and pointed to the sky. Everyone looked up. In the far blue, a dark shape rose. It was not a bird. It was a human warship. It moved slow and proud. Its hull was scarred from long travel. It did not fire. It did not make a show. It simply came into sight and held there like a slow question. The leader's finger did not lower. The gauntlet rested on its knee. The sound of the ship filled the space between heartbeats. The crowd smelled metal and oil and fear. The leader's voice, through the translator, was soft as a closing door. You will answer there, it said. Myra felt the world tilt a little. She looked at Jonas and Hal. They looked at each other and then at the child. The child squeezed Jonas's hand. The three friends had no armor like the parade. They had hands and small tools and old stories. Today those things might be enough. The drums began again, slower this time. The parade moved on, but the crowd did not break. The human ship hung like a question in the sky. Myra thought of the trinket in her hand. She thought of the village she remembered. She thought of the friend who once carried a roof on his back. The parade went on, but the trade moon would not be the same. A choice waited in the blue above. The friends walked toward the place where answers were kept not in plates, but in the people who stand together. The council hall smelled of old stone and oil. Light fell through tall windows and cut the room into bright bars. Armor plates hung on hooks like sleeping beasts. Faces under metal hoods watched from a circle. The circle was very quiet. Myra, Jonas, and Hal stood before the judges. The judges sat high. Their plates were heavy with marks and old scars. Each mark meant a battle. Each scar meant a story. The friends felt small and plain in their cloth clothes. They felt the weight of the hunter eyes on them. At the center of the hall sat an old machine. It looked like a glass globe inside a ring of carved metal. Runes moved under the glass like slow fish. The interpreters called it the memory wheel. People said it could show truth. It did not speak with heat. It spoke with images and feeling. A judge tapped the ring. The ring made a sound like bells under water. The memory wheel began to glow. A thin hum traveled like a petal on the wind. The translator box at the judge's feet made a small voice. We measure intent, it said. Memory is our scale. Myra felt the hum in her chest. Her palms were damp. She thought of the trinket in her hand. She thought of the child in the street. She had been ready to tell a soft story, but now story would be measured by cold glass. The first image rose in the glass. It was not a picture like a painting. It was a smell of smoke, a taste of salt, a small hand on a shoulder. The judges watched. The leaders of the rival faction watched too. Their plates gleamed like a second sun. The memory wheel showed a village roof collapsing. It showed two people, strangers, pulling wood and dirt away. It showed a small face that later became a child who hid a trinket. The judges murmured. Some plates bobbed up like birds. One judge leaned forward with more interest than the rest. Then the glass showed another memory. It showed a night of fear. It showed a human camp hiding. It showed a hand turning away. Faces in the crowd tightened. The rival faction clapped like a slow drum. They wanted proof that humans could be weak. They wanted a verdict that would make the trade moon hand them over. Myra stepped closer to the glass. She did not speak. Her friends did not speak. The memory wheel showed things without mercy. It showed a time when Jonas had been frightened and run. It showed Hal's hands trembling as he buried a broken seed. The judges saw the small faults and the small graces both. The lead judge, whose armor had a notch like a tooth, closed their eyes. They rubbed the notch with a gauntlet. Memory tells more than facts, they said through the translator. It tells pattern. It says what the heart does when steel sleeps. A rival captain stood. She wore black plates and long chains. Her voice was sharp like flint. They are not like us. They hide under weak codes. They use friends as shields. Send them away, or bind them. The room hummed with anger. Some in the crowd shouted for punishment. Others chewed their lips and kept quiet. Myra looked at Jonas. She saw the memory the glass had shown his fear. She also saw how he had returned later, carrying water and tools. Memory showed both. Hal's hands had trembled, yes, but they had steadied when a child had needed a bandage. The memory wheel did not lie by leaving out the second half. The judges argued in low voices. They spoke of law and of danger. They spoke of honor and of the old wars that had shaped their rules. The lead judge listened and then turned to the friends. You must prove your way, the judge said, slow as stone. A trial will decide whether you stand or fall. You may show us your strength. Or you may show why you measure it by others. Myra felt the room tilt. The meaning of the judge's words moved like a tide. The friends had come to speak with simple words. Now they stood before tests. The memory wheel had changed the tone. A new list of eyes watched them, some with pity, some with hunger. From the back of the hall came a whisper. It was a voice that no one wanted to hear. It carried through the circle like a cold wind. If they pass, the whisper said, we lose our call to war. The rival faction hissed back. The lead judge's hand tightened on the ring. The memory wheel pulsed like a heart. Jonas felt something rise inside him. He was not the bravest man in the world. He had once left a post to save himself. But he had learned to come back. He had learned to hold a hand when a friend needed it. He stepped forward. I will go, he said. His voice was not loud. It was as clear as a bell dropped in a well. I will lead the mission. I will show what our way means. A murmur ran like water. The rival captain smiled like stone. The judge tapped the ring. A mission will be set. You will travel to the place where old wounds are kept. There you will do what your people say strength is. You will either make allies or prove nothing. Myra and Hal did not argue. They had no shields, but they had each other. They would go with Jonas. They packed small tools and old seeds and a last piece of the trinket. People in the hall watched them ready. Some faces were kind. Some were sharp. As they moved, a small hand passed a folded message to Jonas. It was hidden under a scrap of cloth. He unfolded it in the dim corridor. The message was short. The ink was quick and crude. It read, "They will not test your strength. They will test your friends." Jonas folded the paper and put it away. He looked at Myra and Hal. They understood without words. The memory wheel had shown their faults and their good. Now the real test would be outside the ring of judges, in the places where trust is earned and kept. They left the hall with their small packs. The memory wheel dimmed behind them. The judges returned to the glass and to their old arguments. Outside, the air tasted of metal and distant rain. Above, the human ship waited in the blue like a slow promise. The friends walked toward the ship. Each step was a question. Each breath was a promise. They did not know what the trial would ask. They only knew they would answer it together. The trial place was carved into red stone. High walls held banners and bright metal. People sat on rough benches. Armor clinked like wind in a forest. The air smelled of dust and spice. A loud bell rang. The trial began. Myra, Jonas, and Hal stood in the center. Their clothes were plain. Their hands held small tools and a wrapped seed. Around them, armored champions waited. Their plates were sharp and wide. The crowd shouted in a language that made the friends' ears burn. The judges sat above like carved mountains. The first test was strength. Two giant champions stepped forward. They did not speak. They only moved like falling trees. The rules said, meet force with force. The crowd expected battle. The champions lunged. Jonas looked at his friends. He felt the old fear that the memory wheel had shown. His palms sweated. But he did not think of weapons. He thought of the child in the parade and the way the crowd had held its breath. He thought of small hands and soft promises. When the champions charged, the friends did the thing no one expected. They ran not to fight but to help the fallen. A small booth had collapsed under the champion's step. A young alien child lay trapped under broken wood. The crowd gasped. The champions paused, confused. They had been taught to strike, not to spare. Myra dropped her tools. She and Hal pushed at the wood. Jonas called for a rope. Together they made a small pulley with thin wire and a stall pole. The crowd fell quiet as the three of them worked. Their motions were simple. They lifted slowly. The child's eyes opened wide. When the wood moved free, an old woman cried. The champions lowered their arms. The judge's bell rang. A murmur moved through the benches. Some shouted that the friends had broken the rules. Some cheered. The lead judge watched carefully. The rival faction looked angry. The people on the benches were unsure what to do with this new kind of answer to power. The second test was a puzzle of iron. A locked gate held a water wheel. The wheel had to turn to feed a dying village. The rule said, only the strong may open the gate. The champions had muscles and tools and pride. Myra looked at the lock. It had a clever pattern. Her fingers itched. Myra and Hal worked together. Hal steadied while Myra bent wires into a small key. Jonas used his pilot's steady hands to hold the wheel. They talked in soft voices. They moved like a single thought. The gate clicked. Water ran with a sound like relief. A child in the crowd laughed and splashed. The judges nodded. Some faces softened. The rival captain bristled. She muttered under her breath. She called a guard forward to loosen a bolt on the friend's pack. Someone tried to shove them, but other spectators, small shopkeepers and a trader with one eye, stepped in. Their hands were human and alien together. They held space like a wall. Between tests, the friends learned the trial's true shape. The tests were not only about winning. They were about what a people would do when it was hard. The memory wheel had shown faults. The trial asked, will you make them worse, or will you make them whole? A sudden shout split the air. Smoke rose from the far end of the arena. A wagon had tipped. Under it lay a rival captain's aide, an important person. The crowd swelled with noise. The rival captain pointed and called for the friends to be removed. They trick, she shouted. They steal our favor. The judge signaled calm. The final test will decide, he said. It will test the choice between gain and mercy. The friends felt their chests tighten. The final test would not be like the others. It would ask them to pick a path. They were led to a small island of stone in the middle of a shallow basin. Around the island stood banners and weapons. Above, ropes held a cage. Inside the cage hung two things, a chest filled with clear metal that would win them honor, and beside it a trapped rival captain suspended by ropes. The trap had been set by the rival faction to force a choice. A hush fell. The judge's voice was thin as wire. You may take the chest and end your trial. Or you may cut the ropes and save the captain. Your choice will tell us what your measure of strength is. Jonas felt the weight of the memory wheel again. He remembered the night he ran and the night he returned. He thought of the trinket and of the child with wide eyes. He looked at Myra and Hal. They looked at him. Around the arena, murmurs rose like a wind. Some wanted them to take the chest and bring honor to their people. Some wanted the friends to fail, to show humans were soft. The rival captain smiled as if the choice would break them. On the stone island, the chest glinted. It promised easy victory. The ropes that held the captain cut into the skin of her arms. She was not strong like the champions, but she was breathing. Her eyes flicked to the friends with a look that had both fear and challenge. Myra stepped forward. Her hand hovered over a small knife in her belt. The knife could cut ropes. It could also be used to prise open the chest if they wanted. She thought of the child in the parade and the memory wheel and the words of the judge. Her heart was loud in her ears. Hal placed his hand on the stone. He thought of soil and seeds. He could picture a small garden growing where a chest would rust away. He wanted friendship to mean more than gold. Jonas remembered the folded paper that warned them, "They will test your friends." He understood then that this was not only a test of courage. It was a test of their promise to each other. The bell rang. The crowd leaned forward. The judge lifted a gauntlet and waited for their answer. The final trial lay like a thin line between two choices. The friends looked at one another and saw not fear but a map of their small, steady lives. Jonas squared his shoulders. "We are not alone," he said, and his voice reached the benches. The rival captain's smile tightened. The judge watched the three of them for a long slow breath. They now must choose, seize the chest and win, or cut the ropes and save a rival. The bell was stilling. The world held its breath. Rain came like a sheet of gray glass. The sky was hard and low. Armor did not shine in that weather. It cracked and hung with drops. The convoy road was a ribbon of mud and stone. Part of it had fallen into a ravine. People called out from the wreck. Myra, Jonas, and Hal rode in a small shuttle with the human crew. The ship slid down through clouds and set them near the broken road. The judges had sent a messenger to watch their choice. The rival faction had sent soldiers with cold faces. The crowd at the trial waited like a sleeping beast. They walked toward the crash. The convoy was a long line of wagons and armored crates. One great plate of a transport lay folded like a fallen shell. Men and women and children were trapped beneath it. Smoke rose from a torn engine. A child cried somewhere under the metal. Jonas felt his heart in his throat. He had been in many storms. He had seen ships tear and people fall. But this close, the metal looked heavy like old grief. Hal set down his pack. He pulled out a coil of rope and a small crowbar. Myra checked a thin cable and a little engine kit. Their tools were small. Their hands were steady. The rival captain barked orders. Her soldiers circled with long poles and bright lights. They wanted to secure the convoy and take its cargo. The judges watched from a ridge. They had not expected a rescue. They had expected spectacle. The crowd below pushed and pressed, hungry for one more rule to be obeyed. Myra ran to the nearest fallen plate. The metal had buckled. It held a family under its curve. A woman clutched a child and looked at Myra with eyes that said please. Myra bent wires and made a lever with the crowbar and a clean log. Hal and Jonas found a long beam and set it like a fulcrum. They worked by rhythm more than plan. They did not use weapons. They used small tools and hands. They called to trapped people with soft words. The metal groaned but did not fall. The child under the plate made a small sound like wind in a pipe. Myra put her shoulder to the beam. Jonas tied the line. Hal counted. Those who watched heard the slow music of people lifting together. At first, some armored men laughed. They said this was not their work. They had come for metal and trade. But a guard saw the little child's face and could not turn away. He stepped forward and pressed his gloved palm into the mud. Another followed. The soldiers' armor was dented and old. A few of them had children's names scratched inside their helmets. They remembered small hands too. Soon, hands of many kinds pushed under the plate. Alien hands and human hands met where the metal cut the day. A trader with 2 missing teeth used a strap to hold a broken axle. A woman in bright cloth sang while she worked. The song was simple and it helped the tired. The beam shifted. The plate moved an inch. A cheer rose when the child's head showed. But not all watched with kind eyes. The rival captain's face was hard as flint. She stepped back and signaled a small drone. The drone was thin and sharp. It would mark the cargo and claim it for the rival faction. The judges frowned. They had not wanted war. They had wanted a measure. As the rescue went on, a hidden memory from the leader's past surfaced. An old general in the crowd touched the notch in his breastplate. He had once been young and proud. Once, his armor had crushed people he loved by accident. The memory sat like a stone. He had never told anyone. He looked at the hands now and felt the old crack. The rescue finished. The child was pulled free and given to a mother who wept with relief. The crowd's mood changed like weather. Some judges nodded. Some merchants wept. Even the rival captain's soldiers were not all stone. A few shields lowered. But the rival captain herself gripped her spear and did not blink. The leader of the judges asked for silence. He stood and his armor rasped with old voice. He spoke of old wars and of armor that failed when it mattered most. He told a short memory of a day when a wall fell and plates could not hold. His voice cracked in the end. The crowd listened like a held breath. In that moment, the tide of opinion moved. Traders shouted that humans had shown a kind of strength they had never counted. The memory wheel had shown many faces. Now, the court had seen hands. The rival faction hissed like a curling flame. They called the rescue a trick to gain favor. They said the friends had staged it to win hearts. Myra felt tired but light. She did not think of prize or honor. She thought of the child's small fingers. She thought of the way people had reached without counting rings on plates. Hal found a seed that had fallen from a crate and tucked it in his pocket. Jonas looked at the judges. He felt a new courage. A messenger rushed in, breathless and pale. He carried a small, sealed slate. He bowed and handed it to the lead judge. The judge opened it with slow hands. The slate held one short word in a blunt script. The lead judge's eyes widened. He read it twice and then looked over the crowd. Someone had fired a forbidden signal. The word on the slate was a code for recall and shutdown. It meant the assembly had to shut its lights. It meant the old alarms and roof shutters would fall. It meant danger. Before anyone could move, a thin beam of light shot across the sky. A hidden device sang and the great lamps of the valley went out. The world became a black cup. A low grinding started. The judges' benches trembled. People cried out. In the dark, a roof above a nearby market gave. Old supports had been rotted by rain. The roof fell toward a cluster of children. One small cry rose and cut through the blind noise. A single hand reached out in the dark. The friends could not see who cried. The rival captain cursed and reached for her blade. Myra grabbed Hal's sleeve. Jonas groped for his rope. The crowd lurched. Friends, judges, traitors, and soldiers heard only one clear thing, a small voice in the dark. The trial was no longer a test of honor. It was a test of life. The great plates and proud banners meant less now. The measure had shifted into the dark where hands find each other. The friends moved as one step. The rain beat on the metal and the world waited for the next sound. Dark pressed close after the signal. Voices turned into small lights that moved like beetles. The roof had fallen, dust hung thick. A child's cry cut through the dark like a clear bell. It was a thin sound, scared and brave at once. Myra could not see more than a shape. She felt the air full of hands. Jonas called out, "Where are you?" His voice was small but steady. Hal felt the world like a map under his feet. He put his hand on a beam and then on another person's arm. People answered without names. Fingers found fingers. Someone lit a lantern. The light showed a small space where a roof lay half on a market stall. A child's leg stuck out under a broken beam. The friends moved as they always moved, together. They slid under the fallen wood. They pushed and rolled and breathed in counts. A traitor from the benches pulled a strap. An armor judge held one end while a human grocer tied the other. The rival captain's spear flashed. She stepped forward to make the law. But then she saw a little hand freed and a mother's face open like dawn. The spear hung for a long slow beat. The rival captain's chest heaved. She had been trained to strike at fear. In that moment, she felt something she had not measured before, shame. A judge with an old scar took off his helmet. It was small and simple. He knelt and used both hands to steady the lantern. His fingers shook. No one had seen him bare before. A whisper ran through the crowd, "The judge is helping." The sound spread like warm water. The hidden coup tried to move. A small band of armed men slipped from shadow and aimed for the judge's circle. They wanted to seize power while the lights were down. Their leader had thought to use the chaos. He had counted on plates and confusion to win. But the hand that reached for the leader's shoulder was not a judge's hand or a soldier's hand. It was a child's hand, sticky with stew. The child gripped the man's sleeve and would not let go. The man looked down and saw a face he had once loved, a sister, perhaps, in a past memory. His arm fell. He lowered his weapon. Around the arena, people chose. Some chose armor and fear. Many chose hands and breath. The coup faltered because the crowd did not let it grow. Traders and soldiers and housewives and children formed a slow human wall. The rival captain, who had wanted the trial for victory, now stood with rain and dust on her spear, not knowing where to point it. Jonas climbed to the judge's rise. He lifted his voice, not to shout but to make a single simple truth clear. "We measure strength by what we do when the lights go out," he said. "We measure it by who we reach for." The words were not clever. They were true. The lead judge listened. He felt the ring of the memory wheel under his palm. He had seen images and arguments. Now he saw it live, hands lifting plates, a captain lowering a spear, a child holding a would-be attacker. He had been taught to count scars and trophies. He rubbed the old notch and thought of a day when armor had not protected those he loved. The judges talked in low tones. The rival captain pressed for the old law. She wanted a harsh decision. The crowd pressed back with soft moves. They asked for mercy. A quiet voice from the bench, an old merchant, said, "Strength is the rope that pulls us from under the metal." Many heads nodded. A vote was called. It was not the end of all things, but it would change how the trade moon kept score. Plates were raised, then hands, then tools. The lead judge's hand trembled as he put his plate down. He looked to the memory wheel and then to the friends. He spoke through the translator box. "We will change how we count," he said. His voice was rough but honest. "Not only by the shine of metal, but by what hands hold in the dark." The words were small. They landed like stones that begin a river. Some judges agreed. Some would not. The rival faction hissed and broke off. They would not accept this change now. They gathered like a hard wind, planning another day. But the assembly had spoken enough that the old rules would be bent. A new council would form to write measures that include mercy. After the vote, Jonas, Myra, and Hal stood on a small rise. People cheered, but the sound was quiet and careful. The child from the market ran to them and wrapped tiny arms around Myra's leg. The trinket the child had left in the parade sat in Myra's palm. It looked small and foolish beside new rules and old wounds, but it was a promise kept. The lead judge approached. He did not wear his helm now. He took one step and then another. He reached out and touched the trinket with a finger that had held spear and shield. He looked at Myra. He looked at Jonas and Hal. His voice was low. "You measured something new," he said. "I felt it when I could not stand. I will learn." He handed a small strip of polished metal to Jonas. It was not a medal of war. It was a key to a small office in the new council. It was simple and honest. The rival captain slipped away with her followers. She did not shout. She only left like an old storm moving off the sea. The friends watched her go. They did not hate her. They only knew she had not yet learned the count they had found. The festival returned slowly. Plates still paraded, but now hands walked beside them, children, traders, and judges. Myra fixed the broken trinket with a thin wire. She tied the scrap of cloth round it like a bandage. She gave it back to the child. The child smiled and put it near her chest like a map. Later, when night came and fires smelled of spice and bread, Jonas opened the trinket. Inside, under the carved bone and cloth, was a thin slip of paper folded small. It was old and brittle. On it was a strange map fragment and a single line of letters in a language neither human nor common, a mark like an iron star and the words, in a slow hand, "Find where friends keep their promises." Hal looked at the paper and smiled like someone who plants a seed and waits. "Another road," he said. The friends did not know where it led. They only knew one truth had changed: Armor could not count everything. The trade moon slept. Under its sky, people now had a new number to count by. It fit on one small palm.